The water hit Marcus like a cold slap of reality. But it wasn't the balloon that knocked the breath from his lungs. It was the pale, manicured hands pressing down on his shoulders, forcing his 12-year-old body beneath the surface of the community pool with a violence that spoke of something far darker than summer fun gone wrong. "You little brat." Margaret Wellington's voice cut through the cheerful shrieks of the annual Riverside Heights Water Balloon Festival like a blade through silk. "Look what you've done to my dress." The festival had been perfect until that moment. Children laughed and squealed as they hurled colorful balloons filled with cool water across the park, seeking relief from the oppressive July heat that had settled over their suburban community like a heavy blanket. Parents watched from folding chairs, some joining in the chaos, while others captured memories on their phones. The smell of grilling hot dogs and hamburgers mixed with the sweet scent of sunscreen and chlorine from the adjacent pool area. Marcus Thompson had been having the time of his life. At 12, he was one of the older kids, which meant the younger ones looked up to him, while the teenagers still let him hang around. His dark skin glistened with a mixture of sweat and pool water, his bright red swimming trunks a stark contrast against his athletic frame. He'd inherited his father's broad shoulders and his mother's infectious smile, both of which served him well in making friends wherever the family moved for his father's work. The Thompsons had only lived in Riverside Heights for 3 months, but Marcus had already carved out his place in the community. His teachers praised his quick mind and natural leadership abilities. His teammates on the summer swim team marveled at his technique. His neighbors appreciated his politeness and willingness to help with yard work or walking dogs. Everyone, it seemed, except Margaret Wellington. Margaret served as the Homeowners Association president, a position she wielded like a scepter over her suburban kingdom. At 52, she maintained an appearance of perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothing, and an expression that suggested she perpetually smelled something unpleasant. Her husband Richard's successful law practice afforded her the luxury of dedicating her days to what she called community improvement, though most residents had learned to fear her interpretation of improvement. The water balloon that started everything had been thrown in innocent fun. Marcus aimed for his friend Danny, but the red balloon sailed wide, arcing through the humid air before exploding against Margaret's white sundress as she stood near the pool's edge, clipboard in hand, supervising the event with her usual stern disapproval. "I'm sorry," Marcus called out immediately, his mother's lessons in politeness ingrained deep. "It was an accident, Mrs. Wellington. I was trying to hit Danny." But Margaret's face had already transformed from its usual pinched expression into something approaching rage. The water had created a transparent patch on her expensive dress, and drops still clung to her carefully styled hair. More importantly, in her mind, a child had dared to disrespect her authority in front of the entire community. "Accident!" she shrieked, advancing toward Marcus with predatory intent. "You people never take responsibility for anything." The phrase hung in the air like poison. Conversations around the pool area began to fade as heads turned toward the commotion. Marcus felt his stomach drop, recognizing the tone and the words that adults used when they wanted to remind him that he was different, that he didn't quite belong. "Ma'am, I really am sorry," Marcus said, backing toward the pool's edge. "I can get you a towel, or maybe my mom can help." "Your mother should have taught you better manners." Margaret's voice rose to a pitch that seemed to silence even the birds in the nearby trees. "But I suppose that's too much to expect from your kind." The words hit Marcus harder than any physical blow could have. He'd faced this before, in other towns, other schools, other communities. The subtle and not so subtle reminders that some people would always see his skin color before they saw him. But something about hearing it here, in this place his family had hoped would be different, made his eyes sting with tears he refused to shed. "That's enough," came a firm voice from across the pool area. David Thompson approached with the confident stride of a man accustomed to authority, though few in the community knew the extent of his professional responsibilities. To his neighbors, he was simply Marcus's father, a quiet man who worked for the city and kept his yard immaculate. Margaret whirled around to face this new challenger to her authority. "Your son deliberately targeted me. He's disruptive and disrespectful, and I won't tolerate it in this community." David's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "Marcus, go apologize properly and help Mrs. Wellington get dried off." "But Dad, I already—" "Now, son." Marcus nodded, swallowing his hurt and confusion. He approached Margaret with the cautious steps of a child who'd learned that adults could be unpredictable and dangerous. "Mrs. Wellington, I'm really sorry about your dress. It was completely an accident. Can I help you get cleaned up?" For a moment, Margaret seemed to consider the apology. The watching crowd appeared to exhale collectively, assuming the incident would end with a gracious acceptance and perhaps even a lesson about forgiveness and community. But Margaret's anger had been festering for months, fed by resentment over the changing demographics of her carefully curated neighborhood and her belief that the Thompsons represented everything wrong with modern society. "Help me," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You've done enough helping. You little—" What happened next unfolded with the terrible clarity of a nightmare. Margaret lunged forward, her hands gripping Marcus's shoulders with surprising strength. The boy stumbled backward, his feet slipping on the wet pool deck. Before anyone could react, both figures tumbled into the shallow end of the pool with a tremendous splash. But Margaret didn't surface immediately to sputter and complain about her ruined outfit. Instead, she used her adult weight and size to pin Marcus beneath the water, her hands pressing down on his shoulders with methodical pressure. "This is what happens," she hissed, her face contorted with rage, "when you don't show respect." Marcus struggled beneath her grip, his lungs burning as chlorinated water filled his nose and mouth. The cheerful sounds of the festival became muffled and distant, replaced by the rushing sound of water and his own panicked heartbeat. He tried to push upward, but Margaret's position gave her leverage and advantage. The crowd around the pool erupted into chaos. Some people screamed. Others pulled out their phones to record. A few parents covered their children's eyes, while others pushed closer to get a better view of the unfolding drama. "Someone help him!" shouted Danny's mother, but she seemed frozen in disbelief. "Is she actually trying to drown him?" gasped another voice. David didn't waste time with questions or hesitation. 23 years of lifeguard training and water rescue experience kicked in automatically. He dove into the pool without removing his shoes or shirt, cutting through the water with powerful strokes that spoke of countless hours of training and real-world rescues. His hands found Margaret's wrists and applied pressure to specific nerve points that forced her to release her grip on Marcus. "Let go of my son," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life or death situations. Now. Margaret found herself being lifted bodily from the water and deposited on the pool deck with embarrassing ease. David cradled Marcus against his chest, checking his breathing and consciousness with the practiced efficiency of a professional rescuer. "You're okay, son," he murmured, feeling Marcus cough up pool water. "I've got you. You're safe now." Margaret sat dripping on the concrete, her carefully maintained appearance completely destroyed. Her dress clung to her body in an unflattering way. Her makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks, and her hair hung in limp, chlorinated strands. But worse than her physical appearance was the dawning realization of what she had just done in front of dozens of witnesses. "He attacked me!" she shrieked, as if volume could alter reality. "That boy pushed me into the pool and then tried to—" "Ma'am," David interrupted, his voice carrying a new edge that made several bystanders step backward. "You just held my 12-year-old son underwater for approximately 23 seconds. That constitutes attempted drowning under Municipal Code 47B, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 18 months in county jail." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children seemed to sense that something significant had shifted in the adult world around them. "You can't arrest me," Margaret sputtered, water still dripping from her clothes. "I'm the HOA president. I was disciplining a disruptive child. You have no authority here." David stood slowly, Marcus still in his arms, and the crowd got their first real look at the quiet man who'd been living among them for 3 months. Water streamed from his clothes, but his posture radiated confidence and authority. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire festival area. "Ma'am, my name is David Thompson, and I serve as Division Chief for the Municipal Lifeguard and Water Safety Department. I'm also a certified peace officer with arrest powers in all matters relating to water safety and public endangerment. You are under arrest for attempted drowning of a minor, child endangerment, and assault." The crowd erupted into a buzz of shocked conversation. Parents who had smiled politely at David during neighborhood barbecues suddenly realized they'd been making small talk with one of the city's most senior public safety officials. Margaret's face cycled through several expressions as she processed this information, settling finally on a mixture of disbelief and growing panic. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're just another resident. You work for the city, but you're not. I oversee water safety operations for the entire metropolitan area." David continued, setting Marcus down but keeping a protective hand on his shoulder. "I coordinate with police, fire, and emergency medical services on all water-related incidents. I've personally conducted over 300 rescues and testified in dozens of court cases involving water safety violations." He pulled out his phone and speed-dialed a number that connected him directly to dispatch. "This is Division Chief Thompson, badge number 4471. I need a patrol unit at Riverside Heights Community Park for an arrest in connection with attempted drowning and child endangerment. Suspect is in custody." Margaret scrambled to her feet, water squelching in her designer shoes. "This is ridiculous. I was disciplining a child who deliberately attacked me. You can't possibly think that any court would side with—" "Ma'am," David said firmly, "you need to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." As if summoned by magic, phones throughout the crowd began displaying the same video footage that would soon make Margaret Wellington infamous across social media. The crystal-clear recording showed Marcus's innocent apology, Margaret's racially charged response, and her deliberate attempt to hold the boy underwater while he struggled for air. "Oh my God," whispered Sarah Martinez, another neighborhood mother who had witnessed the entire incident. "She really was trying to drown him. This isn't just about discipline or accidents. She was actually trying to hurt that child." The sirens arrived within minutes, their wailing piercing the humid afternoon air. 2 patrol cars and an ambulance pulled into the park's main lot, their red and blue lights painting the gathering crowd in alternating colors of authority and emergency. Officer Jennifer Rodriguez was the first to approach, her professional demeanor immediately recognizing David despite his soaked civilian clothes. "Chief Thompson, what's the situation?" "Officer Rodriguez, I need you to arrest this woman for attempted drowning, child endangerment, and assault. The victim is my son Marcus. We have multiple witnesses and video evidence." Margaret's lawyer husband chose that moment to arrive. Having received several frantic phone calls from neighbors who recognized the unfolding disaster, Richard Wellington approached the scene with the confident stride of a man accustomed to fixing his wife's various social disasters. But his expression changed rapidly as he assessed the situation. "What exactly is happening here?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its usual courtroom authority. "Your wife just attempted to drown a 12-year-old boy in front of approximately 50 witnesses," David replied calmly. "She's being arrested on multiple felony charges." Richard's face went pale as he processed the legal implications. Even as Margaret's husband, he recognized the catastrophic nature of what she had done. Attempting to harm a child, especially with racial motivations, would destroy not only her reputation, but potentially his legal practice as well. "Margaret, what have you done?" he whispered. But his wife was too busy protesting her innocence to acknowledge the gravity of her situation. The paramedics examined Marcus thoroughly, checking his vital signs, oxygen levels, and looking for any signs of trauma or water inhalation. Their professional assessment confirmed what David already knew: his son would be physically fine, though the emotional impact of the attack would take longer to heal. "He's going to be okay," the lead paramedic reported. "No signs of water inhalation or secondary drowning. We'd recommend a follow-up with his pediatrician within 24 hours, just as a precaution." As Officer Rodriguez read Margaret her rights and guided her toward the patrol car, the HOA president's demeanor shifted dramatically. The imperious authority she'd wielded for years crumbled, replaced by desperate attempts to control the narrative. "This is all a misunderstanding," she called out to the crowd. "I was trying to help him learn to swim. He was struggling, and I was just trying to teach him proper technique." But the video evidence told a different story, and everyone present knew it. The footage clearly showed her grabbing Marcus in anger, forcing him underwater, and holding him there while he struggled against her grip. Dr. Patricia Chen, a pediatrician who lived 3 houses down from the Thompsons, stepped forward to offer her professional opinion. "What I witnessed was not swimming instruction. That woman deliberately held that child underwater in a manner consistent with attempted drowning. As a medical professional, I'm prepared to testify to that fact in court." More neighbors began approaching David and Marcus, offering their support and expressing their shock at what they had witnessed. The incident had stripped away the polite veneer of suburban life, revealing the ugly realities that lurked beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect community. "I'm so sorry this happened to your son," said Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had always smiled warmly at Marcus when he rode his bike through the neighborhood. "That woman has been a problem for years, but we never imagined she would do something like this." The festival, which had begun as a celebration of community and summer fun, had transformed into an impromptu gathering for justice and solidarity. Parents who had barely spoken to the Thompsons before now approached to express their outrage and support. "What can we do to help?" asked Tom Bradley, whose son was on the same swim team as Marcus. "Do you need character witnesses, community support, whatever you need? We're here for you." David felt a complex mixture of emotions as he watched his neighbors rally around his family. The attack on Marcus had been traumatic and terrifying, but it had also revealed the true character of their community. For every Margaret Wellington who harbored ugly prejudices, there were dozens of people ready to stand up for what was right. As the patrol car carrying Margaret drove away, her husband remained behind to face the aftermath of her actions. Richard Wellington found himself in the unprecedented position of having to apologize for behavior he could neither excuse nor defend. "Mr. Thompson," he said, approaching David with obvious reluctance, "I want you to know that my wife's actions don't represent my views or values. What she did was inexcusable, and I'll be speaking with your attorney about appropriate compensation for your family." David studied the man carefully, recognizing the genuine shame and regret in his expression. "Mr. Wellington, I appreciate that. But this isn't about money. This is about ensuring that what happened to Marcus never happens to another child in this community." The crowd began to disperse as the immediate crisis passed. But the conversations continued in small groups throughout the park. Children who had witnessed the attack received comfort and reassurance from their parents, while adults grappled with the uncomfortable reality that they had been living next to someone capable of such violence. Marcus, who had remained unusually quiet throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up as his father carried him toward their car. "Dad, did I do something wrong, Mrs. Wellington said I was disrespectful, and maybe if I hadn't thrown that balloon." David stopped walking and knelt down so he could look directly into his son's eyes. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. You did absolutely nothing wrong. You threw a water balloon at a water balloon festival. You apologized immediately when it accidentally hit someone. You tried to help make things right. What happened to you was not your fault, and it was not acceptable." Tears finally spilled down Marcus's cheeks as the emotional impact of the day caught up with him. "But she was so angry, Dad, and she said those things about our kind. Why do some people hate us just because we look different?" The question hit David like a physical blow, as it always did when his children encountered the harsh realities of prejudice and racism. No parent wanted to explain to their child that some people would judge them based on skin color rather than character. But David had learned long ago that avoiding the conversation only left children more vulnerable. "Son, there are people in this world who are afraid of what they don't understand. Sometimes that fear turns into anger and hate. But for every person like Mrs. Wellington, there are many more people like Dr. Chen and Mrs. Patterson and all the neighbors who stood up for you today." Marcus nodded solemnly, processing his father's words with the seriousness of a child forced to mature too quickly. "Will she go to jail?" "Yes, son. What she did was a serious crime, and there will be consequences. The law doesn't care about her position in the HOA or her family's money. When you attack a child, you face justice." As they drove home, David called his wife Elena to explain what had happened. Her sharp intake of breath when he described Margaret's attack was audible even through the car's speaker system. "Is he okay? Are you both okay? I'm leaving work right now." "We're fine, physically, but this is going to be a difficult conversation tonight. Marcus is asking the questions we always hoped he wouldn't have to ask so young." Elena Thompson worked as a social worker specializing in child advocacy, so she understood better than most the long-term impact such incidents could have on young minds. "We'll get through this together. And David, I'm proud of you for staying calm and professional. In that situation, with someone attacking your child, it must have taken enormous self-control." David didn't tell her about the moments when his professional training had warred with his parental instincts, when he'd wanted to do far more than simply arrest Margaret Wellington. 23 years of lifeguard experience had taught him to remain calm in crisis situations. But nothing had prepared him for watching someone deliberately try to harm his own child. The news of Margaret's arrest spread through Riverside Heights with the speed that only small community gossip could achieve. By evening, every household in the neighborhood had heard some version of the story, though the details varied wildly, depending on the source. Social media amplified the story exponentially. The video of Margaret's attack went viral within hours, garnering millions of views and thousands of comments expressing outrage and support for Marcus. Local news stations picked up the story, and by the late news cycle, Margaret Wellington had become the face of suburban racism and child endangerment. The story took on additional layers as investigative reporters began digging into Margaret's history as HOA president. They uncovered a pattern of discriminatory enforcement of community rules, with documented evidence of her targeting minority families for violations that she routinely ignored when committed by white residents. The Rodriguez family came forward to describe how Margaret had filed multiple complaints about their excessive noise during family gatherings, while ignoring similar parties thrown by their white neighbors. The Patels shared stories of harassment over their cultural decorations during religious holidays, decorations that Margaret claimed violated community aesthetic standards. Most damaging was the testimony of former HOA board members who revealed that Margaret had explicitly stated her intention to maintain the character of the neighborhood by discouraging undesirable elements from moving in. Her comments during closed board meetings had been recorded by members who were growing increasingly uncomfortable with her discriminatory agenda. The legal case against Margaret moved forward with unusual speed, helped by the overwhelming evidence and the high-profile nature of the incident. The district attorney assigned his most experienced prosecutor to handle the case, recognizing both its legal significance and its potential impact on community relations. David found himself testifying not only as Marcus's father, but as the arresting officer and expert witness on water safety. His professional credentials and unimpeachable character made him an extremely credible witness, while Margaret's documented history of discrimination provided clear evidence of motive. The trial itself became a community event, with the courthouse packed daily with Riverside Heights residents who came to show their support for the Thompson family. The evidence was so overwhelming that Margaret's defense attorney was reduced to arguing for leniency based on her lack of prior criminal convictions. But the judge had read the social media comments and news coverage. He understood that this case represented more than just one woman's momentary loss of control. It had become a symbol of the ongoing struggle against racism and the importance of protecting children from adult prejudice and violence. "Mrs. Wellington," the judge said during sentencing, "you used your position of authority in the community to target and ultimately attack a child based on his race. Your actions were premeditated, documented, and witnessed by dozens of people. The court finds that you pose a continuing danger to the community, particularly to minority children and families." Margaret received the maximum sentence allowed under the law, 3 years in state prison for attempted drowning, with additional time for child endangerment and hate crime enhancements. The judge also ordered her to pay substantial damages to the Thompson family and to complete anger management and sensitivity training upon her release. But perhaps more significant than the criminal penalties were the civil consequences that followed. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Margaret from her position and ban her from ever serving in community leadership again. Her husband's law practice lost several major clients who didn't want to be associated with the family name. The Wellingtons were forced to sell their house and move away from Riverside Heights, unable to face the daily reminders of Margaret's actions. The incident also sparked broader changes within the community. The HOA rewrote its governing documents to include explicit anti-discrimination language and created an oversight committee to prevent future abuse of power. The City Council passed new ordinances strengthening protections for families facing housing discrimination. Most importantly, the community came together in ways that surprised even longtime residents. The annual Water Balloon Festival was renamed the Unity Splash, in honor of how the incident had ultimately brought neighbors closer together. Families who had previously kept to themselves began hosting integrated block parties and community events. Marcus returned to school that fall as something of a local celebrity, though his parents worked hard to help him process the experience in healthy ways. The support of his classmates and teachers helped him understand that Margaret Wellington's hatred was an aberration, not a reflection of how most people viewed him and his family. Dr. Chen organized a neighborhood swimming program that brought children of all backgrounds together to learn water safety from David, whose expertise and patient teaching style made him a natural instructor. The program became so popular that the city asked him to expand it to other communities, creating a model for using recreation and sports to bridge racial and cultural divides. On the first anniversary of the incident, the community held a memorial service not for tragedy, but for triumph. They celebrated how a moment of horrible violence had ultimately brought out the best in their neighbors, creating lasting changes that would benefit future generations. Marcus, now 13, and even more confident in his place within the community, spoke at the ceremony with the poise of someone who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. "What happened to me was scary and wrong," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd, gathered at the same pool where he had nearly drowned. "But it showed me that there are more good people than bad people in the world. It showed me that, when something wrong happens, the community can come together to make it right." David watched his son speak with a mixture of pride and sadness, knowing that Marcus had been forced to grow up too quickly, but grateful for the strength and wisdom his son had gained from the experience. The boy who had once struggled beneath Margaret Wellington's hands had emerged as a leader and advocate, using his voice to prevent other children from facing similar attacks. Elena squeezed her husband's hand as Marcus finished his speech to thunderous applause. "He's going to be okay," she whispered. "More than okay. He's going to change the world." As the ceremony concluded and families began gathering around the pool for another afternoon of supervised water fun, David reflected on how much had changed since that horrible July day. Margaret Wellington was serving her sentence in state prison, but her actions had inadvertently created something beautiful, a community that had faced its ugliest impulses and chosen to become better. The pool where Marcus had nearly drowned had become a symbol of resilience and redemption. Children of every race and background played together in the water, supervised by lifeguards who understood that their job was about more than just preventing drowning. They were guardians of safety, equality, and the simple joy of childhood innocence. Marcus dove into the pool with practiced grace, his swimming technique now flawless after months of training with his father. He surfaced with a grin that reflected pure happiness, the kind of joy that can only come from overcoming fear and finding safety in community support. The incident with Margaret Wellington had ended her reign of discrimination and fear, but it had begun something much more important, a legacy of justice, unity, and the understanding that protecting children means protecting the future itself. In Riverside Heights, that future looked brighter than ever, reflected in the laughing faces of children who had learned that, when good people stand together, hate cannot prevail. As the sun set over the community pool, painting the water in shades of gold and orange, David Thompson stood watch with quiet satisfaction. His son was safe, his community was stronger, and justice had been served. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important victories come not from the battles we choose to fight, but from the battles that choose us. The water was calm, the children were laughing, and Margaret Wellington's attempt to drown his son had ultimately drowned only her own hatred in a pool of community solidarity and love. In the end, that was the victory that mattered most.